Due to technical difficulties, we are joining the program already in progress.
It's a simple interaction, but it incorporates, to get to this point, you have to have those sort of core design patterns and techniques, and that's what we're going to cover right now. So let's get going. So real quickly, the stack we're using is Angular, which is a TypeScript-based open source language. It uses TypeScript, and a lot of people are put off. It's like, why do I need to? I know JavaScript. I'm going to learn Angular. Why do I need to learn TypeScript on top of that? And I was one of those. I was a little skeptical, but when you dig into it and you see what the platform does and the role that TypeScript plays, it becomes apparent. Angular is really a well-suited framework for large-scale application development, particularly with team development, where you have many developers coming in and out of code bases. So TypeScript will keep you out of trouble in terms of name collisions, typing problems, and all those kinds of things. So that's what that does. And then the third part of our stack is the ArcGIS API for JavaScript from Esri. Currently, because with the JavaScript API, what you have is the Dojo framework, and with the Angular framework, and you have to have them work together. The current recommended design pattern from Esri is to use the Esri loader, which is a very lightweight object library that will bring all of the goodness of the API right into your Angular app and allow you to work it there. It also comes with a TypeScript library, so you can use typings to get IntelliSense and all of that other goodness there. So there is a repository here that can give you a little bit more about that. Just one quick word on this. If you have issues with the Esri loader, you can raise them here. If you have issues relating to any other aspect of implementation of the loader, I would advise you to go to that repository. So I'm going to, at the end, I've just stood up a new repository within this account to deal exclusively with design pattern issues, design and development issues in Angular. And so I would encourage all of you to come and use that, raise your issues there if you have questions, suggestions, whatever. I was hoping that this can be some sort of a clearinghouse for code samples and solutions. All right, so that's that. So, and then briefly about the CLI. Now this is I find this to be just an absolutely wonderful tool. I don't know if any of you have used the CLI yet, but it really does a lot for a little. It does all of the busy work and the heavy lifting of standing up an application in a line of code. There are a number of advantages. It gives you an application that works right out of the box. You can generate components, and it's a very standard pattern. Eliminates all those time-consuming tasks like of building your own build environment, like with older, it does use Webpack, but you can go in and use Gulp or Grunt or whatever if you wanted to muscle it out and create your own build environment. But why you would want to do that is there's really no reason now with the CLI. It provides a standard application architecture that supports team development, and this is what's so valuable, is that people can come in and out of code bases and just, where things are at. You don't have to learn a whole new system of thinking every time you walk into a new code base. And it's fast, and as you're going to see here in a minute. So installing the CLI is relatively simple. You need to have Node.js and NPM installed on your machine, and from the terminal, just npm install -g at angular-cli, and it'll install it, and it's ready to go to work. There are a few basic commands that you're going to use. They're all really simple. It's not an overly extensive library. ng-new will give you a new application, generate to build a component, a service, pipe, directive, whatever. ng-serve will will fire up a server and a watch on your application, and you just navigate. It doesn't automatically launch the browser. You have to go to the browser. It defaults to port 4200. And ng-build is what will, when you're done with your application, it will give you your distribution. And so we're going to go through some of that. So to generate from the terminal, we're going to, I'll just give you a brief example here to see, and I'm not actually going to build an app. I'll do it in what they call a dry run mode, and just so I can give you an idea, give you a sense of how it looks. And what dry run will do, it won't actually install any files, but it'll just give you a report of everything that it would build for you. And so give it a second here to think, and now it's done, and you can see that this is what it's going to generate. And also, when you do run your ng new, it'll also, you have an option, it'll automatically install all of the node modules for you. That takes 5 or 6 minutes, depending on the speed of your connection and how fast your computer is. So we're obviously not going to do that here. Or you can also run it without that. You don't necessarily have to initialize that, and you can run the npm install later. So, and then once you have the application in place, you just would go to ng serve, and I'll show you how that works real quick. I'm not going to do a lot of typing here because it's just not a good use of our time, and I want to cover a lot more, but just to give you a little sense of what, so let's go to, there's a scaffolding app here. That's an ng serve. It'll go through the build process. This takes maybe a minute or two. It's actually going to do the Webpack build right now. Assemble everything, and then stand up a server for us. And we're going to be good to go. So let's give that a second. Okay, while it's thinking about it, we can come back. I'll come back to this in a second. So let's talk a little bit about when you look in what the ng new creates. It can be a little bit. It gives you a lot. There's a whole structure there. Those of you who haven't seen it, and we're going to go through it here in just a second. There's all of your TD test scripts are there. There's your build scripts. There's applications. There's a lot of files and folders. Some of them are immediate. They're all important, but some are immediately more important to getting started. And so these are 4 that you want to pay attention. There's a bootstrap process that happens when you run and serve an Angular app, which is what it's doing right now. And we'll take a look. You have a main TS file, which you'll see in there, which handles all of the basic instructions on how to launch the app. It points to this app module TS, which you'll become very familiar with. This is a configuration file that basically tells how the application is put together. All of the dependencies, all of the components, all the other modules that are brought in, this is where everything gets configured. And it also directs which is the main component. One of the things that happens in Angular, now in Angular 2, is that we've moved away from that Angular 1 model where it's this purest MVC model where you have a single view and a single controller on a page. It's gone more towards this component-based architecture that React did so successfully, to where you essentially have, it's the Russian nesting dolls. You have one large parent component, and then you just nest your components within it. It's determined by the needs of your application. That brings in the main component, which is then rendered in the index file through a single directive. So let's see if our app is up and running. And it is. And if we were to go now to port 4200, and this is just on that ng new, this is what you get. So everything you need in 2 commands, ng new, ng serve, boom. You got an application, you're standing up and you're running and you're ready to go to work. So let's take a look at the architecture. This is what you get from when you run that ng new command. And there's a lot of files here, as I said. Your README, you get, now this is one file that you'll spend some time in, and we're going to touch on this in a minute. Your Angular CLI JSON, this is what configures the build. So we'll come back to that in a minute, but just sort of put that in the back of your mind. Here's the main TS file. And you see here, it's relatively simple. It just is the core bootstrapping commands that it's telling Angular when you build. It starts here, reads this, takes this information. In this case, it's telling where the app module is. This is that next step up on that chain, execution chain, and that it's going to be running in the browser. When you drop in, this is outside of, this is really the one file that you're of primary concern outside of this app folder. This is where most of your work will happen. All of your components, services, all of your work, all of your code goes in here. So here's the app module TS, and this, you'll spend a good bit of time in here. Now, you see your imports here, the standard structure, you see this. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this, this is a new construct in Angular. This is what they refer to as a decorator. It's a TypeScript object, but it's a custom object built by Angular. So in TypeScript, you can build these things, decorators, which you can apply to any object in your code. And what a decorator does, it's just a standard sort of add-on. It's like a plugin. When you compile the code, it adds additional functionality or provides other service to it. In this case, you'll see this very common pattern throughout Angular. Decorators are always preceding a class. And it tells Angular what to do with that class when it compiles. In this case, it's this parent object class, the app module, and this is where all of the resources that you're bringing into your app are going to be included. And so your components, and I know it's a lot, and you're not going to retain it. I'm just putting it out there so it sits in the back of your mind. As you repeat this, it'll become clearer. All of your components will come in under declarations. All of the libraries that you bring in through import will come under imports, and later we'll see the providers or all of your services, which are basically all the classes that you bring in that provide functionality to your application. Go in there. Lastly, this is then the main component. Again, the decorator. It tells it this is a common pattern for all of your components. It is a component decorator, as the name indicates. It tells it what the selector is. This is the default. I just leave it at the default. You can name it whatever you want. But at AppRoot, it tells it where the template is and where the style URL is. And then it gives it a basic property of title. And then last in the boot sequence is the index file, index HTML, and there's the directive that plants the main component. And that's what creates this app right here. So by default, and if we were to look into that template for that, we'd see the HTML markup for that. Pretty straightforward, and a lot of power in just a little bit of work. So what we're going to do real quick, we're going to create a component here to begin to build our app. So we're going to begin with this live serve, and hopefully it's going to work well. So this is what we want to do. So we're building this application. So real world example. So we're going to use the LP API that we want to run a search against. So one of the first things we have to have is we have to have a key so that we can access the LP API. And so we want to have a way of saving that key so that the application can use it. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use local storage. So it's going to be pinned to your machine. It's obviously, but in real world case, obviously you would use a remote server for this. So how do you create a component? Well, very simple syntax, and you'll see this ng generate is the keyword there. Then the name of the object that you're trying to create, and then the name of the object itself, and then any options behind it. There's also a shorter syntax in case you don't want to do a lot of typing. 4 letters, ng, g, c for component, s for service, P for pipe, D for directive. Really, really, really simple to get up. So I'm going to just copy and paste here because I don't want to make a mistake. And come into code environment. So this is now I'm in my editor, but it's the same structure that we were just looking at in the GitHub repository. ng using the console, I give the command, and my component is created. I look in my apps folder, and here it is. So what it's done is just generate. Not only has it generated all of these files for me, I have my code behind module here, which stands up all of this scaffolding for me by default. It gives me a name, the template URL, and the CSS file. Just a quick aside on this. Like Angular JS, Angular 2, you can do inline templates if you want. So you wouldn't use template URL, you would just use template : and then put all of your HTML markup there. But to me, it's much cleaner to just keep everything separated. But if you wanted to, you could. And it also gives you a component CSS file. And these are all scoped CSS. So this file gets prepended with any styles that we create get prepended and attached to this component so that you don't have name collisions with other components. So Angular is very smart about how it does that. It gives you a very simple template. And it also gives you a test module. So you want to do TDD, it already breadboards all of this for you. You can begin to write your tests. So it's a lot of power when you work out of the CLI. So one other thing I want to show you is it also then registers it for you. So that folder we were looking at, your app module, where you have to register all these things, it just does that sort of housekeeping work for you. You can see it's created this import statement here for me, and then it's added it to this list of declarations, so then I can just begin to use it in my app. So it's really fast. So to use it, then I would just come into, let me grab some, let me do this in 2 steps. So I would come into my app component, and this is that sort of boilerplate Angular markup that you were seeing initially. Let me delete that. So I'm going to put my key manager in there. I'm going to save it. It has a watcher, as you see, so I couldn't even get back to it fast enough to watch it compile. It's done, and so there's that basic template. It's rendered for me, and it's ready to go. So a lot of help, and so you can really focus on the tasks that you need to, and all this other busy work is largely taken for you. So let's move into actually building this module out, this little component out, and what we want to do is I'm going to bring in a new template and not force you to watch me type it. And then I have a code. I'm going to replace the code module. And basically what this does, this has all of the CRUD and other functionality to support entering. It's a single input field. You're going to enter your key. You have a save button. It's going to save it to local storage, and then when the component loads, it's going to pull the key out of local storage and stick it in there. So it's a very simple one input form. Look over here, and it's already put together for us. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to save, and I'm sorry? Oh, I did. Okay, thank you. I certainly did. Thank you very much. Let's go back to that. There we are. Okay, and there it is. So, okay. Live demonstration coding is always risky. So, okay, good. So let's take a look at the code and see what we have. By the way, I think the font is big enough. I don't think there should be a problem seeing it. Okay, let me close that up. So what we've done in this component, very simple. Again, all of this boilerplate here, the decorator and so forth. So the original code, I've created a label. I've created a class variable API key. I have a couple of simple methods. I have an update method, which you'll see is an event handler. I have a write method that writes it to local storage. And then I have this, in your class, you'll have these two, your constructor and your init function already stubbed out for you. And in this case, When I initialize the function, I'm just pulling from local storage and assigning it to that local variable. So the key takeaway here is really about property binding, how we do property binding in one-way and two-way property binding. This is an example of doing one-way property binding. We have option here where you do string interpolation when you're working with divs or other content. It's still this standard double mustache syntax. And then in within forms, you'll become very familiar with this very quickly. Square brackets are for binding properties, and parentheses are for binding your events, right? So this is one-way binding. We bring the API key in, and then when the input changes, it triggers the input event and calls that value and sends it back to that. So there's no right way or wrong way. Two-way binding is nice, and we'll look at that in a second. It's really just what the requirements of your project are. And as you follow this project through, I actually set it up as two-way binding, but then it becomes necessary to break it later because we have to split the functionality of reading and writing between two components. Okay, let me move forward here. Let me get going. Okay. So two-way property binding. So let's see what the difference is there. So take a look at the code. So in the completed version in the repo, you'll see a different syntax. Oops, one more time. Let's go back to that. Key manager here. So here is an example of how we do two-way binding. So it combines the square bracket and the parenthesis together, but it requires an additional module that you have to bring in the forms module. So we're going to bounce back again to that app module TS, and I'm going to show you how we bring that in. So, but before I do that, I just want to just make clear that so we no longer have to name the event. This is a constant within the Angular framework. That you just ng model, and then your the value that you set it to is the name of the property. You no longer need an event handler. So if we come in and look at our app here, whoops, one mouse, come back, module tools. We see that we bring in this forms module from the Angular forms package. We bring it in here, and then it's brought in as an import. So again, all of your imported libraries come in through this import. So it's nice that they named it similarly. It sort of ties it together. Okay, so now we've got this really simple form. So let's keep going and give it a little style and add some additional components. So what we want to do next is we want to create a header for it. We want to create a list. So we're going to create a list, maintain a list of what our favorite foods are. So when we search, we can find what we want. We're going to begin to leverage the built-in Angular directives, and we're going to add some global styles so that what we wind up with looks like this. So here's a schema of what we're going to do. I'm a big diagrammer. I love boxes, and it just helps me visualize and understand what I'm building and keeps me out of hot water. So we're going to be adding these two components and adding them in. And here would be the commands we would run if I were going to run them for you. So ng generate component header, ng gc cuisine list. Then we're going to bring in these two libraries from outside. We're going to bring Bootstrap and Font Awesome, and so that we can have those. So let's take a look at the code. Okay. So let's begin with the simplest one. So in the header module, we just want to put a name on our component. So it's really simple, and sometimes simple is good when you're getting started. So the only unique thing about this component is this single property that I've added in. Everything else was created by the CLI for me. So I just want a title and call it Where to Eat. And how do I get it into my app? Come into the header module. And then it's just a very simple, because I'm now going to have Bootstrap, so I can begin to use the Bootstrap classes to make things look nice. I just bring it in my H1 tag, and I use the double mustache string interpolation, and now that variable is going to be rendered in the header. Again, the CLI has done all the busy work of registering it for me for module 8, my app module, so I don't have to do any of that busy work. It's just happening for me automatically. So now the cuisine type list is a little more complex component. So what are we doing here? So I'm going to start with, initially it's just going to work off of an array variable in the component. So I create a seed list. I put in some CRUD methods that I'm going to use that I then expose through the class and then bind that up to my template. And here we're going to begin to see a few things. So if we come back to this, we're going to begin to use some directives. So the way this works, so I have a little form in here that I'm showing and hiding. If I want to edit something, I may have an edit button here. So it's actually a separate form. If I want to delete something, I can delete it there. So I have some interactivity happening here. So not only am I having a list that I'm repeating, so I'm going to use the ng4 directive as my repeater, but I'm going to do some conditional rendering of the UI. So let's take a look at the HTML. So what we can see here is that here's the ng4, which loops through and builds my rows. And then I have some additional properties set where I have my forms that are controlled by ngIf, so it's going to display or not display based on the value of the property in my component class. So we go back. So I have this editing type, so it's looking at this. Now, so that's how that component is built, and they're all just, again, brought into the UI quite simply through the app module, and see how those are brought in. And like that schema, they're just stacked, 3 components in line. Now, to bring in global styles, this is a very common issue. How do I bring them in? This is actually part of the Angular build process itself. And that's in this file here, the Angular CLI. Once I have it installed through NPM in my node modules, there's a styles property here. Just very simply, just reference it in. This style CSS is the base CSS file that's given to you by the CLI when you create your application. And any other styles, you just list them here and they're ready to use. So really simple to bring them in. If you have to hunt for it, you can be a little vexed if you have to hunt for them. So this is good to know. Okay, so now what we want to do, so we have a basic UI here, but we want to begin to make it more dynamic. Obviously, this is not ready. We only need this API key. We only need the API form when we're going to enter an API. If you have the API key, don't show the form. So don't clutter the UI unnecessarily. So what we're going to do, we're going to go from that to this. So I have a reset feature here, but if I reset it, now it hides everything else for me because there's no reason to show the application if you don't have an API key. Sort of a simple logic. I save the key, and now it renders the form. So how am I doing this? Well, again, through the use, there's a couple of key techniques here. Let's take a look at this schema first before I look at the code. So this is basically what we want to accomplish here. And the way they do this is by sharing properties. So one of the common challenges that you have in component-based architecture is how do you share information across your application with other components? You have there are dependencies in your UI. So in this case, we can use within Angular. There's a built-in set of objects, inputs, outputs, and event emitters. And now these work in a very limited context when you have parent and child components. If you have a child component where you need to communicate back and forth with, this is a great solution for that, and that's how we're going to structure this. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to, rather than having just the key manager be completely responsible for the key, the dashboard's going to read the key. It's going to look at local storage when the application bootstraps. Do I have a key? Yes? Okay. Show the input list. I don't have a key, show the form, right? It's that simple binary logic. Now, if I show the form, then the key manager is going to be responsible for that little editor. It's going to write the key, so it's going to be back and forth. So the dashboard reads it, the key manager writes it. And then the cuisine list is simply just directed by the dashboard to show itself or not show itself based on the intelligence of the dashboard. So the dashboard knows how to render itself, and everything else just does pretty much what it's told to do. Very simple design pattern, but you repeat this over and over again. So let's take a look at the code and see how we've done this. So let's begin in the dashboard module. So what you see is that now in the code, in the dashboard module, I have this basic functionality, which is when on initialization, go and find the key. And then it exposes this other method, which is update key. So what happens is that, excuse me, in the dashboard template, you'll see here it's now two child components. So instead of being stacked, all three being stacked in the main app module, these two are nested. Here we have the use of this ngIf directive. So if the property is present in the parent, show it. If it's not, don't. And now this is a significant little piece of code here. This is how you share information between parent and children. So the API key, even though they're named the same, the API key is being handed in from the parent, assigned to the property of the child. So this square brackets is a reference to the child. This is the value in the parent. This here, as I mentioned in the previous code sample, is how we declare events. Now, this is a custom event called key saved. So when that key saved custom event is fired by the child, it contacts the parent who is listening for it, and then fires the parent's update key method. So that's how that works. Let's take a look at the key manager or the key manager component, which is where the important stuff is happening. So setting up inputs and outputs is a relatively simple process once you understand the pattern. And so you can use this as a guide to get you started, and this should take you a long way. So the first thing to do with an input, we need just to bring in the input module from the Angular core package. To deal with outputs, we need to bring in two, an output and an event emitter. So you bring those, import those into your application, and then you declare them right at the top. Now, this is another use of a decorator. Anytime you see this @ symbol syntax followed by a method, that's the close parentheses for a method, that's going to be a decorator. This is an input decorator, and what it's going to do is going to decorate this property that immediately finds it in terms of API, the named API key. And what that does is it makes it so that it can receive that property as we just looked at in the HTML template. So when the dashboard hands it in and it says, hey, here's an API key, now the child knows what to do with it. And says, okay, I know it, I got this, this is an input, I'm going to store it here in this property. Same thing with output. A little more syntax, but this is essentially use the output to create an event emitter object. And this is what's going to signal whatever anything that's configured in the parent to listen to, this is how it notifies it. So really simple syntax, decorator, the name of the custom event is a new event emitter, and then I'm ready at any point in time to use it. So in this case, what I've done is I have that, this is the, in the form, when I push the button to save the key, it fires this method. Here's the property coming in, the event object coming in. This does the writing. I'm saving my key, and now I'm going to notify the parent that the key has been saved, and then the parent's going to do whatever it wants. So the logic of the two are completely detached. It just knows what its role is. So that what you have then is this simple back and forth functionality. So the dashboard was notified that the key was just removed, was updated. It saw that it had been removed. There's no key anymore. So now I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to notify my UI so that it renders itself correctly. Makes sense, yes? Okay, good. It's relatively simple, but really important pattern. Okay, so we have a problem, though, is that we have this, let me actually save a key, that anytime I'd make changes, it's not persistent, right? So it's just an array variable, but so now what I want to do is I want to make it behave a little more real. I want to persist these values. So the way to do this is through a service. Now I'm going to mock up a service through local storage here, but it's going to work, the same principle is the same. The key is really how do we use services in our Angular application to provide functionality, core functionality. So here's our schema of the app. Right? So we're going to bring in this thing called cuisine type service, and what it's going to do, it's going to maintain our list for us. So on launch and load, it's going to give us a list of values that the component knows how to render, and when changes are made, it's going to manage the read-write operations on that end as well. The way we generate a service, really simple. ng, generate service, give it a name, and then any options that you want. In my case, what I do is I like to combine all my services in one folder. I don't want to create a individual folder for each one, so I use this flat option flag. Let's take a look at the code and see what it looks like. Now, services for me is one of those things that can be, the name is used to mean so many things. Service, what kind of a service? Server-side service? No, client-side service. Oh, client-side service. Okay, client-side service. Well, what is a client-side? Okay. Can be very confusing, and coming in, it's like, it's actually really simple in Angular. A service is just a class. It's just a class. There are two ways that you can use it. You can use it as sort of a factory where you could have a component create multiple instances of that class where it news it up over and over again. But one of the more powerful ways is to have a shared service where you have a single instance of a class, a single instance of a class that is shared across multiple components. And what goes into that class can be whatever you need it to be. It can be your object model. That defines it. You can manage state variables. So it becomes the common resource where you update the entire state of your application, a very complex application with many components. You can also use it for common functionality. I always have a utility class in my applications where I'm doing just these sort of routine chores over and over again, and I just copy that module and add to it each time, and I just carry it from project to project. So the way it's created, very simple. You see, it just brings in this injectable when you create it through the CLI, but you actually don't even need that if you were just to hand code it. It exports a simple class. It has a constructor, and then it just follows basically all the ES6 rules. Although you are in TypeScript, so if your linter will ding you about typing and so forth, and it's a good idea to do. So what we've done here is we've set up just a bunch of basic CRUD methods that it's going to use through the application. And now how do I make it available? And this is really one of the really wonderful parts of how Angular works for us. So it's going to handle, once you create a class and you want to share it, Angular will handle the instancing and management of the class. You just need in your component to say, hey, I need to use this class. And so to bring it into the application, you import it, and now here's this providers again, and now you bring this, you just list it as the name here. And Angular will do the rest for you. So anything that wants to use that cuisine type class, Angular will now hand it a copy of this common instance of this class, and it'll do all of the other routine work for you. So let's take a look at the code and see how we bring it into the class. So what we see is we do an import here. So it has reference to the file, and then in your constructor, and there is a shorthand way of doing this. Is sort of the long form. You essentially what you're doing is you create at the top of your class, you create an instance of it, what you want to reference it. This is the type variable. This is what TypeScript does. You use colon and then the typing. So now, but it's just declaring a variable. And then on the constructor, it brings it through, and Angular will inject this into, it's why it's referred to as dependency injection. It injects it into the component, which is then assigned to this component level class. Actually, if you were to use an access control here, like if you were to private CT service, you actually wouldn't even need this assignment, and you wouldn't need the variable. It will just create it for you automatically. So that's how services work. And then from that point, let me just step back to the code just 1 second. You can see that when it initializes, it calls the service, says, hand me my list of types, and then it has these other CRUD methods that all refer to the service. So when I delete it, I call the service to delete it. When to save it, I call the service to edit it, so forth, right? So standard CRUD, I'm not going to go into that here because this is basic JavaScript development. And that's what gives us that. So it doesn't look a lot different at that point, but now what it's going to do is it's actually going to, if we come over to the next one, we'll see that when I add, say for example, do I have deli there? I save it. I refresh my browser, and it's persisted. So I'm saving data, but in this case to local storage. Okay, so what's next? Well, obviously this is a too simple of an app, so we want to be able to add more components. We need a search control. We want a map. We have some other stuff, so we're going to want to control our UI a little bit more. And basically where we're going to go to our next stage is that we want to have routing, so we're going to have a little simple navigation so that we can maintain our list in the back tab. But basically what we want is we want to have a search control here, and we want to have our mapping visualization there. So let's go forward with that. How do we do that? Well, this is the schema, so it's going to get a lot more complex here, but it begins to resemble a real application. So we're going to need to have a wrapper around. We're going to bring, first of all, we're going to bring the key manager out of the dashboard, and we're going to bring that up to the top level. We're going to create a console that is basically where our whole UI is stored. We're going to have a dashboard and a cuisine list, where we're going to be routing back and forth on that navigation, showing one or the other. And then within this console, we're going to drop the dashboard down into that and create two new components. One is for the search panel, and the other one is for the map. Neither one of them they're just stubbed out there. There's nothing in there. And then we're going to add this additional service, which is the Yelp service. So we're going to take the functionality out of the key manager, the read-write, and we're going to put it into a service now. And this Yelp service is actually going to be what we're going to use in the next step to begin to talk to the Yelp API. So there's a lot going on in this step. We're going to add quite a bit of functionality, but this is all you're going to need with the CLI to generate it. NG-GC, I have a new console. NG-GC, I have a new search panel. NG-GC, I have a map panel. And then I'm going to create a new service called Yelp, and I'm going to reorganize it. And in a minute, I've stubbed all that core stuff out, and it's added to my app, and it's all registered and ready to go to work. I can just step into it and begin to code. So I want to do, there's not enough time to go through all of it. I want to hit the key points here that are not a repeat of things that we've already sort of talked about. A lot of this you're going to see is repetitious tasks. So let's talk about routing, which is really, is the new idea here, and something that you'll be, using a lot in your app. So let's go to the startup at the app module and see how we bring in from the top down. So routing occurs. There is a module for it in the app, in the Angular router package. We import that module. And this is a very simplified route. So you can do sub-routing, but to get basic routing, this is all that you have to do. You're going to set up a variable, which is an array that defines a set of object routes. You name the routes. You tell it it's a component, and then you give it the type of the component that it's going to route to, and Angular will know where to go. And then in this case, we give it a default path. So in this example, you'll see up here in the control that we're now, see, routing, and if I give it nothing, it by default goes to restaurants. So that's what we're doing here. So it's all in the instructions. And then we bring it in, as we did with the imports, because it's a module. We bring it in, put it in the module's property, or the imports property, and the module is injected into the application for us. Now, okay, so we have the module there. Now, how do we set it up? Let's go into the code. Now, the directive for it is really simple. Router outlet. So wherever you want, you can put it anywhere in your nested stack of components. Where you want the routing to occur, you just put this simple directive in, and based on that property that you've given it, this is where Angular is going to inject those components. So pretty straightforward, really simple. The last part of it's 3 parts. So you configure the routes, you tell where to put the routes, and then you have to trigger the routes. So in the triggering, what we've done with this is we've used the key manager. Normally, I would create a separate navigation strip for it, but in the interest of simplicity, I already had this component here, and I have that button to reset the key, so I just combined them all together. So it sort of made logical sense. And you can see that this is where the that reset key is, right? So this is the former template, but now what I've done is I've added in this new bit of HTML code here, which has 2 buttons, and this is all that it requires. Really simple. Router link. And then I give it the name of the component. When you click this button, it's going to know when Angular compiles that it'll create an event on that, so that when that button gets clicked, it'll go to that route. And also what's happening here is you see I'm getting this nice, so you know which is the active route. That's done here with this. So this is actually a bootstrap class that I'm using. But but this event, router link active, is saying if this is the active link, if this is the active route on this, then assign this class. So simple. And again, this is when you understand these patterns, you can accomplish so much so quickly. It really moves your development process along. So let's get into services real quick. And we have 9 minutes, and so let's use them as well as we can. So here's what we're going to be doing now, is that we're going to begin to add some actual 902.10, and we're going to begin using the API. Now, one little aside on this, the Yelp API Fusion, their Fusion API no longer supports cores. So you can't hit it from a client. So you need some sort of a service. So what I've done is I've included in the repository, there's a very simple proxy there. It's a little node app called Yelp Proxy. You'll see it in the root. You just hit npm install. Once you get your node modules in there, npm start, and then you'll have the proxy, and then this sample application routes through that proxy. So if you go to 3000, you can see it's running on my local machine, so it's ready to go. Just a necessity of this demonstration. So, but let's look at the important part about using the HTTP connection. So this is just going to use some more structure. So basically what we're doing in this, we're adding a couple more components. So I'm not going to review this because we've already talked about this, and you can see the samples in the repository. Every step has a step list. So it'll walk you through exactly what to do. And it's also in the slides. But basically we're running these commands, and one of the important things here is not only about using the HTTP client, but it's now getting into this more complex sort of requirement about how do we communicate between components that are not related in a parent-to-child relationship. So now what we're going to have is we have a search control that's a sibling, or a search panel that's a sibling to our map panel, and they both need to know what's happening. So when search results occur, it needs to notify the, and if we come here, actually, let me run this one more time and just give you an example of what's happening. Whoop. I got it. So I don't have a map, but what I'm doing is I'm triggering this event, right? So as I come here and I click on it, it has to somehow notify its sibling that something has occurred. But I can't use inputs and events. I can't use inputs and outputs in an event emitter. I have to use another mechanism. And that's where ArcGIS observables come in, which is just this fabulous way of communicating. It replaces what we used to use as like scope broadcast in Angular JS. And it's really easy to set up and very powerful to use. So let's take a look at the code on that and see how we are managing our communication. So first I want to just quickly look at the service. And in the Yelp service, to begin to use HTTP, we bring in this module from the library, and we have a standard, here would be our search method, where we're using this HTTP object, and it works in this very standard kind of way, a callback. But in this case, it uses subscribe, but we're handing a callback method. We bring back the search results, and then something sort of magical happens here, which is we're using this, calling this next method, and this is what the observable is. So what an observer and an observable and an observer is basically you create an object, and then you expose that object, and any other object that's interested in listening to it subscribes to it. So the observer subscribes to the observable and says, hey, I'm listening to you, and and when you do whatever it is that you do, I'm going to hand you a method. Please call that method. So in a way, it works like a callback, but it's not a one-off, right? So every time that event would happen, that callback-ish method gets fired. So let's go into this just a little bit more deeply. So basically, we bring in at the top, import ArcGIS subject. This is the name of the object that is the observable. Comes in as subject. We create a new instance of it here, and then it's then available to anybody who wants to subscribe to it, and we'll look at the other side in a minute. But what we have is that now this observable fires, so any subscriber gets notified when we call the next method. Let's take a look at that. So who's listening to it? So now this is this object here is this larger component, right? So this big rectangle here is my control panel. And my control panel is interested in knowing when results have been returned so it can render them. So I bring in the service, which has that observable object on it, and then in my initialization method, this is how I get a subscription to it. Basically, I call this property, update results, I call the subscribe method on it, I hand it the method that I want to execute. This is where it begins to look kind of like a callback. It returns this object. Now, in this code, I'm not doing anything with the subscription object, but it itself has a whole bunch of methods associated with it, where I can cancel the subscription. Like, okay, I don't need to know any more about this. Stop notifying me, and I can click cancel. But in this case, we're not doing that. But it's going to return these results. So that's how that works. So we're running a little short on time. Let me fast forward here. And again, the code is here. Walk through it. If you have any issues, log them in the repository. I'll be happy to respond. But let's move into the map. So we bring in the map through the Esri loader. Again, just simple npm modules. We have these type libraries where we can bring in the TypeScript so that we get IntelliSense and strict typing. And then once you're in the module, it looks very similar to what you do with the ArcGIS API in normal applications. But instead of using the require method, Esri Loader uses this load modules method. That's the only difference. But once you're in the callback, works exactly the same. You can use these standard naming conventions for the object, but I would recommend that you use the TypeScript typing library to do that. And so let's just very quickly look at the map panel, and we'll see the code. And where are we? Okay, so we brought it in, and in our initialization method, this is where we build our map. Looks very familiar. Okay, so that's it. So where to get help with Angular? Obviously, Angular I/O, Stack Overflow, Google. Where to get help with the Esri JavaScript API, jsarcgis.com. And I appreciate your coming and your feedback. If you would provide, this is the first time that I presented this. I'd really like to get your feedback to what can make it better. We're trying to there's so much to talk about with this framework, but by providing the repository as a teaching resource, I'm hoping that it can extend beyond the 1 hour that we have here to talk about it. So if you can give me some feedback on the app, I'd appreciate it, and then come and log your issues. And I did want to just point out one other repository real quickly while I'm here. If you come to by the way, this is from the JavaScript API that we did on Wednesday, so also code samples there. So if you want to dig deeper into doing things with the map and the JavaScript API, asynchronicity, state management, some other cool things. But I've just set up this repository this morning, and basically what I'm hoping to do here is for Angular developers working with the Esri API, as you have questions about how to do things, come and raise issues here, and I'll respond to this, and we'll work out code samples, and hopefully over the course of the year we'll develop some best practices for things, and this will lead into Dev Summit 2019. So based on the feedback that I get there, I'll know how to put together presentations. So thank you very much for your time.